Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather was released in 1972 and is considered one of the greatest films of all time. The Italian-American filmmaker swiftly returned to the universe just 2 years later with the release of The Godfather Part II, which is also considered one of the greatest films ever made and perhaps the most acclaimed movie sequel of all time. The third film, however, released 16 years later in 1990, is a much mangled film, infamously torn apart by film audiences for its failure to live up to the quality and hype of the first two films. Whilst the movie isn't terrible, it just isn't in the same league as the first two Godfather films, and it doesn't help that just a few months before the film's release, Martin Scorsese released his now classic mobster film, Goodfellas. There are many elements of The Godfather III that do not work. The movie had a rushed production and behind-the-scenes issues that plagued the quality of the finished product, such as Winona Ryder dropping out of the movie and Francis Ford Coppola having to cast his daughter Sophia as an emergency replacement. Sofia Coppola's performance is considered by many to be the worst aspect of the film, in addition to a convoluted plot involving Michael Corleone, the patriarch of the Corleone family, attempting to legitimize his criminal empire and becoming tangled into fictionalized accounts of real-life events such as the death of Pope John Paul I and the papal banking scandal of the 1980s. Whilst the film has many issues, the most amount of notoriety is attached to Sophia's acting in the film, which looks even worse when put next to the performances of acting giants such as Al Pacino. However, I would argue that rather than the inclusion of Sofia Coppola, a much more impactful element of the film was the exclusion of Robert Duvall. Robert Duvall played Tom Hagen, the adopted son of Don Vito Corleone in the first Godfather movie, and thus the brother to future crime boss Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino. Tom also acted as the consigliere and lawyer of the Corleone family. Tom's demeanour is extremely low-key and subdued, especially when put next to the likes of the hot-headed Sonny Corleone, his brother. He is intelligent and level-headed, with strong diplomacy skills and his nature being one without added drama. Among the colourful characters of the Godfather saga, Tom sometimes slips through the cracks, and you could be forgiven for forgetting that in a room full of the likes of Vito, Michael, Clemenza and Tessio, that he's even there. But as The Godfather 3 proves, when he isn't there, you notice. Played with exquisite precision by Robert Duvall in the first two movies, being nominated for an Oscar in the first, Tom Hagen is completely absent in The Godfather Part 3. His absence is explained in a brief line of dialogue by Al Pacino when Michael Corleone mentions that Tom Hagen died before the events of The Godfather 3 take place, and he calls him a great lawyer. Michael's consigliere in the third film is instead B.J. Harrison, played by George Hamilton, and whatever you think of Hamilton as an actor, he's no Robert Duvall. And what the hell kind of name is BJ anyway? This is the only explanation given in the film, but it is elaborated on in a novel written by Mark Weingardner, who was commissioned by Random House and Mario Puzo's estate to write a set of sequel books to the Godfather universe which would bridge the gaps between Part 1 and 2 and Part 2 and 3. In the second novel, The Godfather's Revenge, the death of Tom Hagen is included, in which an upstart Don has Hagen killed in order to weaken Michael Corleone, in a power move similar to the death of Vito Corleone's enforcer Luca Brasi in the first film. Tom is knocked unconscious by a character called Nick Gracchi, and wakes to find himself tied in his car and drowning in a swamp. Paramount Pictures have stated that they did not authorize The Godfather's Revenge, meaning the death in the novel is not canon in the movie's universe. It may surprise audiences to learn, but Robert Duvall's Tom Hagen was actually supposed to be in The Godfather Part 3, which would have definitely improved the film. In fact, he might just have played a more expansive and pivotal role in the film than in either of the first two movies, with Francis Ford Coppola originally framing the movie around Tom Hagen and Michael Corleone falling out and fighting for control over the Corleone family. This is alluded to at the end of the second film, with the seeds of discontentment and mistrust being sown between Michael and Tom, despite Tom having proven to be most loyal, with Michael even going as far as to question Tom's loyalty to him in front of his face. Whilst this may be a case of Michael lashing out emotionally after the betrayal of his brother Fredo and his wife Kay, and inner feelings of resentment for his father that manifest against Tom, Coppola may have been setting the stage for a showdown between these two brilliant characters and acting giants in the third film. But alas, it was not meant to be, and the reason, it seems, came down to money. Robert Duvall was offered $1 million to reprise his role as Tom Hagen by Paramount Pictures, an offer which he refused, as he felt the offer was not proportionate given that Al Pacino was being paid $5 million and Diane Keaton $1.5 million. Paramount refused to up their offer, and the character of Tom Hagen was ultimately written out of the film. Reportedly, Duvall was willing to be paid half or even a third of what Al Pacino was being paid, but felt being paid 1/5 was unacceptable. Duvall would go on to justify and defend his position by saying that the only reason anyone even wanted to make another Godfather movie in the first place was for the money, and he wanted, just like everyone else, to have his slice of the pie. Director Francis Ford Coppola was regretful that the character of Tom Hagen had to be written out, as he felt an essential character and counterpart for Michael Corleone was missing from the movie. As Duvall himself stated in a 1991 interview,
"Well, I think everybody did it for money. I mean, why wait 15 years to do a sequel or whatever you call the third one? You know, and they waited that long, so obviously it must be for money, because why wait that long?" So when there have been a lot of stories, and what I've told certain people, here's the real deal. This is the way it happened. If they offer somebody 5 times what they offer me, that's totally unacceptable. If they offered them 2 to 3 times more, which they didn't, that would be acceptable but not ideal, but I would accept it. But they didn't do that. If they offer 5 times, then that's unacceptable, and that's what happened. So it did boil down to economics.
So Pacino was going to get 5 times more?
Yes.
And
I felt it was, you know, why even do it? Coppola said because I didn't want to do secondary parts anymore, which is not true. And that I wanted a great big bunch of money, which is true to a point. You know, I just wanted some slice of the pie. Otherwise, why do it? Because everybody was doing it for money. And when you see the movie, it is not as good as the first 2. I don't care what anybody says. It's not as good as the first 2.
Did you know it wasn't going to be, or did you withhold judgment until you saw it?
No, I didn't know. When I saw it, it was okay, but it wasn't as good. I mean, I thought the premise was very interesting. You know, organized crime connected with the Vatican. You know, it's a very complex and kind of sophisticated, you know, premise to go from. And it interested me to a point, but then when I did see it, I just felt that for whatever reasons, I didn't think it was as good, and everybody I've talked to, except Francis, says that.
I heard Coppola on Larry King, and he said he laid out pretty much the same reasons as you just did from his perspective, but he also made it clear that all things being equal, he wanted you.
Yeah, and I would maybe have liked to have done it, but, you know, it was one of those things. It was 15 years later, and it was like it had been done. So I didn't really see any point to do it again, other than to do as well as you could do, a good script with good feeling, good camaraderie. But it was for money. I'm sorry. They did it for money.
Personally, I can definitely sympathize with Duvall's position here. Paramount treated the film very poorly all round, including giving Francis Ford Coppola only 6 weeks to work on the script. And whilst we can argue that actors should not be haggling over a few million here and there, surely it wouldn't have bankrupted Paramount to pay Duvall just an extra $2 million, especially when, as Duvall stated here, and others like Coppola have also mentioned, the movie was mainly made for the money. It is also worth mentioning that at this point in time, Robert Duvall was an Oscar winner, and Al Pacino wasn't, which may have added to Duvall's bemusement at being offered such a low salary. All in all then, The Godfather Part 3, for many, feels like a missed opportunity, and one largely in part to the exclusion of Robert Duvall's Tom Hagen. For more videos and similar content, consider subscribing to the channel, and thanks for watching.